We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. If you're watching on YouTube, Tom's camera is, on the fritz or whatever. So we got a Tommy logo over there on the other side. But I'm still here, so I guess you're gonna look at my face if you're watching the YouTube video. Oh, that's not the most compelling thing. But regardless, that's what we got for you. And if you're audio only, it makes no difference. So that's probably the happier scenario.
Right. Right. We'll see how long this podcast goes. Not that anybody would know, but last week my wife brought home the Rona from we don't know where. We don't know where she got it from, but she got it from somewhere.
Well, I mean, these days it could be literally anywhere. Going back to work, going back out in public. So
right, it's Florida, so
yes, yeah, right.
It could be a doorknob or something. Anyway, so she during last week's podcast, she was sick in the other room.
Oh dear.
And then by Wednesday night, I started feeling bad, and Friday I tested positive. So we are fortunate. My wife and I are just turned 50 last year. So here in the States, if you're 50, they allow you to get a second booster.
Right.
So we got boosted just last month. So that means that it's almost embarrassing to talk about the symptoms we had because they were so mild.
Okay. There's no embarrassment there. We're happy to hear that your symptoms were very mild. I mean, unfortunate you had any symptoms at all. And
right.
I mean, there seems to be this thing of like, if you don't have symptoms, then like, how bad is this thing really? It's like all along, before we had vaccines, it was like 98% of people are going to survive this thing. And we don't know, I don't know what the percentage was, but many people had no symptoms whatsoever. But we're still carrying it and we're still contagious. So not unusual at all. And then hopefully having been vaccinated and double boosted afforded you some additional protection. So, I mean, it seems it has nothing out of the ordinary here, and glad that it was not like completely wiping you out.
So my wife and I have been sequestered back in our bedroom, just trying to keep away from the kids and masking and everything else. The kids, in fact, they're out getting tested right now, but they have not tested positive, and doesn't look like they're going to. We're outside of our most contagious window, which is the first 5 days, and we've been talking to doctors, telemedicine, and everything else, making sure that we're doing everything right. But on the mend, feeling kind of okay. My sleep schedule is completely jacked because the first those 2 nights that I wasn't feeling well. Apparently somebody's here because my dog just went nuts. Those first couple of nights I wasn't sleeping well because of fevers coming and going and breaking and stuff like that. But now I'm like going to bed at 2 and waking up at 10:30.
Right.
Like,
that's not super mild symptoms. If you're getting fevers, that's
it wasn't
full
like
on ill.
It's actually not considered a fever because it didn't break 100.5. It was just like
slightly elevated from normal.
Just enough to make you feel a little groggy, but not enough to actually consider. I've had much worse illnesses than this, which I'm happy to report that. But
okay.
Anywho, so I'm still considered unfit for human consumption. I am not allowed to really go outside. I think at this point I can go outside the house with a mask on. I think, but it's not until Saturday that I'll be kind of CDC recommended. The recommendations say I can go back to being kind of normal. But the kids are getting tested almost every single day. I'm getting tested every once in a while to see when I could go negative. But they're like, don't worry too much about that because because of the antibodies and everything else, you may continue to test positive on and off for the next month. I'm like, just thrilling. Thank you
Yeah.
for that. That is not what, data-driven Tom really wants to hear. Tom wants to know that there is an end, and when he hits that
Sure.
negative, then he can start.
There is very little certainty with that
Yeah.
end of things. Well, so I mean, this ends our run of until from the beginning of when this pandemic was declared a pandemic until now.
Yep.
Neither Tom nor
years.
I has tested positive on this thing. Now, granted, I've never been tested because I've never had any symptoms, and where I live, we don't test unless you have symptoms.
Right.
So I have never had any symptoms, and I mean, Tom has tested quite regularly throughout this whole thing. So we can say neither of us has ever tested positive until now. That ends that run of that has come to an end. I don't know if people are allowed to continue mentioning notes of gratitude to us for keeping the podcast going, because even though we are keeping the podcast going, we had sort of said in there it was, while neither of us was sick enough that we stopped doing the podcast, which I guess is still true, because even though Tom is sick, he is not sick enough to have stopped the podcast just yet.
That's right. So, yeah. I will say that I started feeling symptoms Wednesday night. I got tested on Thursday. I came back negative. I texted Rob and said, listen, I came back negative. I don't believe it. I'm getting tested again tomorrow.
Yeah.
Then I got tested on Friday, and it's like, yeah, you're positive. I'm like, yeah, I know I am. I was like, there was always like that 1% chance at the back of my mind. I was like, well, maybe I actually do have a cold. It's just coincidence. Nah.
If I were the one going through it, I'd be questioning whether it was psychosomatic, because I am able to do that if I believe.
I told my kids the same thing. I'm like, I am so psychosomatic. I'm like, the minute your mom gets sick, I'm like, I've got it.
Right.
I've got it for sure. I thought for sure that what? Okay.
I was looking at something. I can't really tell.
I don't know. I'm sorry. The PayPal has decided that it wants me to change my. I need to look up the PayPal thing. So.
Oh, I see. We didn't do that
hold
beforehand.
On. I didn't do that. Sorry. I gotta make a new password for this thing.
New password for PayPal. Okay. Well, I mean, while we're doing that, I'll just start in on how we normally start the podcast, which is talking about what we watched this week. So I did watch the first 2 episodes of Obi-Wan Kenobi. That has come out on Disney Plus. I think there's only going to be 6 episodes total, if I have that right.
Yeah, I think you're right.
The first 2 dropped last Friday. So, yes, enjoying that. It looks fantastic. I assume, I don't actually know for sure if they're using the volume, same as The Mandalorian, where the backgrounds are 3D generated and put on a gigantic LED screen behind the actors themselves. And because it's 3D generated in real time, as they move the camera, the graphics shift to make sure that the perspective all stays correct. They certainly use that on The Mandalorian. That's been well featured. My assumption is that they would also use it for Obi-Wan Kenobi, but I don't actually know for certain if that's the case. Regardless, the show looks fantastic, and yeah, seems very promising. People online, of course, are already complaining about the incongruities with what Obi-Wan Kenobi said in episode 4. And I'm like, yeah, it really, all of this up from, what was that, 1970, when would that come out? 76? 79? I'm forgetting when the first episode 4 came out. 76,
it was like 78, I thought, but I might be wrong about that.
Anyway, late 70s. Believe it or not, everything up until 2022 was not pre-written at the moment that Star Wars Episode 4, or just called Star Wars, originally came out. It wasn't all pre-done, so there might be a few little incongruities. But yeah. Anyway, the other thing I watched was Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, the brand new one that is voiced by John Mulaney and what's his name from Brooklyn Nine-Nine? Andy Samberg.
Oh,
Andy slipped my mind for a moment.
We're supposed to watch that. We have not done it yet. Yeah,
Chip and Dale, respectively. It is hilarious. I also think that it is squarely aimed at people exactly my age and Andy Samberg's age, because it is.
That's everything I've heard about that movie says that if you were born in the early to late 70s, this movie is for you. Like,
oh, okay.
Yeah, it is. It has all the callbacks.
I think maybe a little later than that, because I think if you were born in the 70s, I think you were maybe a little bit too old to be watching the Disney Afternoon. That was television every weekday. There was the Disney Afternoon that had Chip and Dale, and it had Darkwing Duck, and what else was there? The one with the characters from the Jungle Book. I'm forgetting the name of it now.
I don't know what that one is. I guess I was too old to watch those things, because I didn't. I watched a little bit of Darkwing Duck, but I was more. Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah,
really remember a lot of that
Tailspin.
stuff.
Tailspin. The name came to me. It was Tailspin.
Oh, I did see Tailspin a little bit, but I don't remember much of it.
Yeah, this new movie is squarely aimed at the people who watch Disney Afternoon. It is less a carry-on from Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, the TV show, and more a pseudo-sequel to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. That's really the style that it's in, is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And I mean, the hilarity comes from, I can't believe they have that character in this movie, because as much as Disney owns, they seem to have made an effort to have far fewer Star Wars and Marvel characters and far more characters from every other brand that's out there that Disney doesn't yet own. There was enough Hasbro characters in here that it makes me wonder if Disney's about to buy Hasbro, because that never seems like it's out of the question to me, and they had a lot of Hasbro characters present in this movie. So anyway, I found it absolutely hilarious. I have no idea if you're significantly older or younger than I am, if you would also find it as humorous. But yeah, it's the Lonely Island guys writing and directing it, and it is definitely their kind of humor. And yeah, highly recommended if you're in the right demographic. And I think it's fairly safe to say check it out, because you will know immediately whether you are in the correct demographic to enjoy this movie. So
I know that I saw Roger Rabbit in the theaters. I remember going to it. I remember thinking, it was fine.
Oh, okay.
I didn't love that movie. So I do want to see this. I think it's The Price is Right, and that I am going to get to see it for
This
free.
should have been in theaters. It's a shame this one wasn't in theaters. It's not really a just Disney Plus movie. Like, it's not something that I would expect to just come to streaming. But that's what they've done. It's just come to streaming. It's not in theaters. So that's a bit of a shame, I think.
So because I've been sick and just wallowing in my own misery, I have watched a lot of TV. So I did watch the Obi-Wan first two episodes. I very much enjoyed it, and I watched it with my wife, which is always questionable, but I watched it first by myself because I wanted to enjoy it, and so I did. There are so many callbacks and so many things that if you have read the comics, there's things you'll pick up on. And I've read some of the comics because of Amazon Prime something. I can get some stuff for free whenever I would take plane trips for business. A couple of years ago. I would download some comics and some graphic novels. So I did get pick up some of the stuff I knew some things about the Inquisitors and stuff like that. Okay. There's just so many little things though that I've watched a couple of videos of people talking about all the Easter eggs hidden. One of the ones that got me is in the second episode when Obi-Wan is talking to Leia. If you look at the framing,
spoiler warning, folks, because Tom, if he's watched it, then everyone should have watched it.
Yeah, no. I'm not going to give anything away. But when he's talking to Leia, he leans over. And it looks exactly like how Leia in the video that she shows to Luke leans over and starts the conversation as she stands up in the hologram. It immediately struck out to me how good that was. So there's a lot I really like about it. There's a couple of things that bother me. I won't talk really specifics because I don't really want to spoil anything for anybody. But I felt like the production value is great. Ewan McGregor, I could watch him read a newspaper.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, he's phenomenal. Yeah. Just a great actor, and even through all that hair, it actually makes me want to go back and watch Alec Guinness, because I feel like some of the hand motions and the playing with his facial hair he does is a physical callback to Star Wars.
Sure.
I think that some of the ways, I think Ewan McGregor adopted some of his mannerisms just so that they would have some continuity. Yeah. It's really good. The writing is good. The characters are interesting. It's a little clunky at times as far as story. there's one moment in the story, it's okay, we want to make sure everybody knows what's happening here. Okay, so in case anybody's not following up, anybody's confused as to what's going on, here is all the info you need. And then it goes on with the story. You're like, okay, well, That's fine. I mean, some people need that. So, but
we do.
Overall,
this
I thought
isn't
it was
really
good.
meant to be prestige television. It is meant to cast a wide net and be able to.
Well, you have to with Star Wars, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
so.
you have to with Star Wars.
I'm fine with things that in prestige television might have been left unsaid. I'm perfectly fine having them said aloud in Star Wars.
Right. I'm comparing it to the other Star Wars properties that have been released, and it definitely feels like, this has got more to it than some of the other ones. Like you felt
it's
like
a
the
little
Mandalorian.
heavier. It's a little heavier, yeah.
The Mandalorian, the first season, you're like, episode 1, you're like, wow, that was cool, and then episodes 2 through 8, you're like, what is going on with this stupid show? And episode 10, you're like, yay, something happened. It all makes sense now. Let's tie back to everybody, or whatever it was. It was something along those lines. So I did like it. I also watched the first 4 episodes so far of Stranger Things.
Okay, I haven't started it yet on season 4 yet.
Excuse me. I will be coughing throughout this podcast, so let's just get over that. It's too late for me in that show. So as far as that show is concerned, like I'm invested in the characters, I care, and it is not scary. It has stopped being scary. Like they're trying, and it's like you can very much by the end of like the second episode, you're like, because during season 3, you're like, oh, this has got RoboCop / Terminator in it. It's got it's got this movie and it's got that movie, and you can see what the different. This one, you kind of by the end of episode 2, you know what movie they're going for, where they're coming from, and they're doing a pretty good job of it, I think. But it's just not scary. It's not scary. It's not even a little bit scary. It's just not scary, and it's fine that it's not scary. I don't really care anymore.
Hokey, and that's why it's not scary.
No, it's just not. I don't know how to say it. There's a couple of like musical cues, and somebody pops up behind somebody, and I'm like, no. That wasn't scary. I kind of saw that coming. Or the spookier parts aren't really that spooky, and there's not. For me, I don't feel a whole lot of tension, and I'm literally waiting until like 11 o'clock at night when my wife is asleep, and I'm watching it with headphones on, in the dark in a room. I'm doing it as scarily as I can, and it's not scary. So, but I'm enjoying it. I think it's pretty good. The kids are all much older, and I don't know if the timelines all work out exactly, but. It does remind me, or maybe, I don't know if remind is the right word. It does sort of bring me back to that time in my life when I was in high school in the late 80s, and which is when this is set, like 86, I think. And just how awful it was, like compared to today, and how my kids go through high school and some of the things they worry about. Like, it's a little bit on the nose. It's a little bit more like everybody's sociopathic, it seems like, in high school in these movies. Like if you look at the movies from the time,
right?
It's like somebody's getting bullied and like the entire school will sit there and watch.
Oh yeah,
and just laugh. And you're like, that's not really how that was. But there was a good
the 1980s
bully.
That's a well-worn character.
That's right, and there's a lot of them in this one, so which is to be expected because these guys are all D&D players, and I do like the callback to like the Tom Hanks movie that is coming out around that same time, and there's starting to be the D&D demonic panic that happened, which is why my parents are heavily Catholic, and when we all watched that movie together, the Tom Hanks D&D movie, I think it was called Ghosts and Ghouls or some crap, but. And they were like, oh my God, it's of the devil, and there people are sacrificing people. I'm like, oh. So I'm going to my friend's house. What are you guys going to do? Play video games? Sure. And I went and played D&D. I mean, and look at me now. I haven't sacrificed a goat in a week. So, but I enjoyed it. I also watched Brave for the first time. Which is
okay. Pixar? Disney Pixar?
Pixar. I had no idea how I missed that movie. I mean, you could tell it's pre-Frozen. Like they're not quite. They're kind of tap dancing around some of the more heavy issues that Frozen said. Okay, we can talk about stuff, and people were going to be okay with it. But before that, they were like, oh, well, let's kind of talk about it, but not really talk about it. I thought it was cute. I thought it was fine. So I liked it. I thought it could have, in light of more recent Pixar movies, like the Red Panda one and the
Turning Red.
And Inside Out and that sort of thing, where the themes are much more heavy and I think better handled. This one felt a little superficial, but I did like it. So there you go.
Cute characters.
You know what I did notice more than anything is when you down mix surround sound to stereo,
Yeah.
it doesn't always sound the way it's supposed to sound.
No. The sounds are all present, but it's not quite the same.
You're like, oh, there's a car coming from the left, and then it goes in front of you, and then it goes across, and then it's like not until it gets to like the middle of the screen where it starts to transition into the right speaker. I'm like, yeah. I mean, they did the best they could, but there's only so much you can really do. So I felt that was very interesting. All right, this is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You go to our website, avrant.com, find our old episodes in the show notes, as well as the images that we'll be talking about in this podcast. You can follow along. Facebook.com/AVRant podcast, YouTube.com/AVRant. Contact Rob directly. His email is rob@avrant.com. His Twitter is @FirstReflect. I'm Tom @avrant.com. My Twitter is avrant_Tom, which is, if you're wondering why my Twitter has been not as active as late, it's because I've been sick and not because I actually never tweet ever about anything.
The link to last week's episode still went out there, so that's about on par.
It did. You should have seen me Thursday night. I was like, I know I'm gonna test positive tomorrow. I gotta get as much stuff done as I can. I was so frantic. I felt like such crap. All right, I want to thank our listeners of the week. These are people who have gone to avrant.com and clicked on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and that sent them to a PayPal donation site, which PayPal just made me change my password for some stupid reason.
Yeah,
Anyways,
weird.
so I want to thank Aras, who's almost had 4 weeks in a row, but skipped a week. Bill and Raph. So Aras, Bill, and Raph, thank you very much for your PayPal donations.
Yes, indeed. Aras, Bill, and Raph, thank you very much for donating via PayPal. We appreciate their financial support.
We also want to thank our 141 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon's a service where you can sign up to be contributing, listening, supporting member of our podcast community. Every month they'll take some money from you and give most of it to us. The minimum is $1. So it's only $12 a year to support our podcast and to maybe get mentioned on this podcast. So Dale let us know that he's one of our patrons. So thank you, Dale, and our other 140 patrons over at patreon.com.
That's right. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast is the place to go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So big thanks to our 141 patrons. Dale, thank you for being one of them.
All right. If you can't support us financially, we understand. Just do something and let us know what you did, and we will mention it. So, oh, by the way, what's his name who sent me the remote? I didn't mention it last week. Dan, I have not given it to my parents yet. Because it's been quarantined with me.
Indeed.
It came the day I knew I was going to be positive, and my wife was already positive, and it was so it's here. They will get it. It's just they're like, I'll give it to you. I'll put it outside. You guys leave it in a Ziploc bag for a couple of days, so they'll be fine.
Right.
Like, no, we're not going to touch it until you get better and you can come over here and set it up. So haven't done it yet, Dan. I will. I'll let you know how it goes. All right. George bought a bunch of acoustic panels from Gick and told him it was because of our recommendation.
Thank you, George.
Dale took advantage of SVS's Memorial Day outlet sale to buy 2 pairs of Prime satellite speakers. He didn't see the option to say where he heard about the SVS during the checkout process. Maybe it's a bit different when it's on the outlet store, so he called them after placing the order to let them know it was thanks to us. So thank you, Dale. And Dale also sent some photos with permissions for me to use them on AV Gadgets. Thank you very much, Dale, for both of those things.
Yeah, there's a little bit more from Dale below.
There
the
is.
There, yeah.
There we go. So Dale says he's enjoyed watching our back catalog of episodes on YouTube. He isn't quite sure how other people listen to us at 1.5 or even 2 times speed. He kept it at normal speed since even 1.25 made him miss some of our comments. That's because Rob talks really fast. Thankfully, he is good-natured and found it entertaining and humorous when we darn near accelerated the Mirage omnipolar speaker design. He has all Mirage speakers except for his Polk Center. And Rob said how he could never ever recommend an LG LCD TV while he was watching us on his 86-inch LG.
Yep.
Which is probably an LCD as well.
Yes.
He says that even though his pair of SVS SB3000 subs are both at the front of his setup due to the shape of his room, he doesn't have any bass issues at his seats, but he did have slap echo at high frequencies, so he found environmentally friendly acoustic panels made from recycled cotton over at Audimute,
I think, because it's like audio but minus the O, so Audimute. Yeah,
Audimute?
I believe so.
Audimute.
They do look nice. They have a plethora of finish options. So
they do.
Pretty cool.
I'm looking at them now. How much they cost, though, is the question.
They're pretty reasonable. They're like, obviously it changes with size and thickness,
Sure.
but like the 2 foot by 4 foot by 1.5 inch, which is their standard, is like $95. So it's not ridiculously out there or anything. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dale, for all of those things.
Yes, thank you, Dale. Much appreciate that you gave the permission to use those photos on avgadgets.com.
All right. We got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going, even though I am currently with the plague. I've got the plague. Got that from George, Dan, Dale, who's part of our 2 Hour Plus Club, Jay, and Aras. After thanking us for our time and info, Jay asked if we could forward his email to Aras. Jay has been to Simply Stereo, so he figured he and Aras are probably neighbors. So now they're both in touch and can chat about home theater without us. You're cheating! Dan says we can keep him going. He says we keep him going during his frequent, boring drive times. And he stands by his previous comment that he loved 2 AVRant episodes every week if it were possible. Eddie got a kick out of Rob's review of Old, but to be fair, he also laughed during the Batman when the Batman didn't need any special gadgets to spy on Catwoman because in this awful crime-ridden, mob-ridden city, apparently nobody closes their curtains. So there's a couple things. So this is notes of gratitude from George, Dan, Dale, Jay, Aras, Dan, again, and Eddie. So
I'm pretty sure those were 2 separate Dans, because, 2 separate emails.
Right.
I don't remember.
I don't know.
I was loopy doing all that stuff, too. So George, Dan, Dale, Jay, Aras, Dan, assuming that was a second different Dan, and Eddie, thank you very much for sending in those notes of gratitude to us. The notes of encouragement are certainly appreciated, and a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
Crap. I don't have a mask in here.
Oh.
I was going to do
you're on video. I'm not going to get it from you.
No, I know. But I have to leave this room at some point. And I was going to do this in the quarantine bedroom that we've been in. But we talked to a doctor today, and she said that I'd have to be quite so neurotic. So I'm out here, but I have to walk through the house to get back to the Okay. Anyways, news. Don't hold your breath that the supposed Xbox Cloud gaming streaming stick, which I had already completely forgotten about. Because don't hold your breath about it.
Yeah.
Which is good because I wasn't. So after announcing it last year and then being rumored to release this year, Microsoft has said they're made the decision to pivot away and take our learnings and refocus our efforts on a new approach to deliver Xbox Cloud gaming to more players around the world in the future. They're releasing another phone.
Xbox phone. Instead
X
of Windows phone,
the
it's going to be Xbox phone?
It's not a box. The Xolope, like an envelope, because it's going to fold.
Oh,
Xolope.
Folding phone. Could be. Honestly, I'm a little surprised. I'm a little bit surprised. So the speculation behind this article is that, maybe Microsoft has taken a look at the financials of, say, Google Stadia and Amazon Luna, and nobody's
using them whatsoever.
Really lighting up the world in terms of revenue with those things. So perhaps they're saying, we'll wait until internet is a little bit faster and more stable to actually make streaming gameplay a bit more fun and reliable. So I'm a little bit surprised at this, though, that they're actually going to pivot away from their plans of just Xbox Cloud gaming full steam ahead. But it seems as though if you were thinking there's going to be a little Roku stick type thing that you plug in and you stream your games that way, not going to happen this year.
I think that they really are going to end up having to, or all going to end up doing, not having to do, but they are going to just get away from hardware full stop. It's going to be, no matter what device you have, you log into their app and you play.
Well, yeah,
games.
I mean that was already back when they were talking about doing this. It was going to be on Samsung televisions, just an app, just built into your Samsung television, and you stream it that way. I don't know that wasn't specifically mentioned as being dropped, but if they're not going to do their own little stick with the app on it, I kind of figure that the app coming to just a smart TV is probably also on hold, but that wasn't specifically mentioned in this write-up, so that is yet to be determined.
Yeah, I don't know. Gaming has changed so much, you know, and I know it's my age. I know that that's part of it. But even my kids, so my kids have had free run of the house, which means for the first time in many decades, I remember what it feels like to live with roommates in college. They are filthy. They are absolutely. I haven't left the bedroom in days, so I come out today and there's just piles of dog hair everywhere because the dogs aren't, you know, they're not sweeping or anything. The kitchen looks like I don't know how you can walk through this house and not go, I have to clean that. That's certainly some sort of biohazard. The refrigerator is a mess. The whole thing is a disaster, and it's
a good
just
preview.
It's just absolutely wrong. So I don't remember what my point was with that, but I don't
know how that relates to cloud gaming.
I was gonna get somewhere with it. That was on my way, but then I had so much fun saying it that I forgot.
The
what
COVID
it was.
brain took over.
Oh
and
no,
the
gaming.
point was lost.
So my kids have had free run of the house, and now they're gaming constantly, and they're not playing the games that you would think they are playing. You know, everything they're doing is it doesn't matter which game it is. They only care about if they can do it with their friends.
Right.
So, except for my one son who's just playing one game that he likes, and he used to play Overwatch all the time. Now he's playing Risk of Rain 2, and it's all he plays, and he's just trying to get all the achievements. I'm like, okay, so that's to me the more traditional gamer type, where you get the game, you buy the game, you beat the game. And that's what he's trying to do. But everybody, the other two boys, they could be playing any game. They don't really care what it is because they're just doing it with their friends. Yeah. So I think gaming is fundamentally changing. It's either really super casual on your phone or it's a social thing for most people. I don't think it's what even the big manufacturers think gaming is anymore, but we'll see. Samsung quickly delivered on their promise of a firmware update for their S95B QD-OLED TVs. That's the one where when you put it into the test mode, it gave you accurate colors, and when you took it out of the test mode, it gave you shut up. This is very bright. Saturated or whatever.
Just brighter and oversaturated. Yep.
Vincent Teo has confirmed that the filmmaker mode now tracks the HDR PQ curve much more accurately, regardless of the test pattern window size. Every other picture mode is still inaccurate, including game mode, which is over brightened. But at least filmmaker mode is very close to industry standard now. Why is my screen so dim? And now, and there's no more trickery going on with detecting typical test patterns. So that's good. Got caught with their hand in the cookie jar. Got slapped. Took their hand out of the cookie jar. Good job, Samsung. For
honestly, I'm perfectly fine with that. I don't care that all the other modes are inaccurate.
No,
I would like for game mode to be potentially accurate. I would like there to be a way to at least adjust it to accuracy, because if you want the lowest latency, then you're going to want to use game mode. And this being an OLED, a quantum dot OLED, unlike the full array local dimming LCDs, where usually putting it into game mode and VRR, the variable refresh rate, also means that the local dimming is either turned off or greatly reduced. So you're taking a hit on the picture quality on most full array local dimming LCDs when you put it in a game mode. But on an OLED, there is no such hit because it's not a local dimming algorithm going on there. So I would still love to see a game, or put in a second game mode, accurate game mode, who cares? But as long as there is one picture mode that is accurate to the industry standards, I am fine with that. I am fine with it not being the default, that I actually have to hunt for it and put it into that mode. I'm fine with all of that, so good enough, and I'm glad that the firmware update arrived very, very quickly, faster than I expected.
So Gene from Melioholics detailed the new addition to the Anthem's ARC Genesis room correction software. To be clear, this is currently still in beta, but there's a simple toggle within the Anthem software to select whether you want to update to beta releases. The new feature is an automated phase adjustment and alignment between the subwoofer output and the speakers, rather than relying only on the initial speaker and subwoofer time alignment, which sets the distances. At the end of running ARC Genesis, the beta, it plays the front speakers and the subwoofers together, and then plays a series of sweeps that shows the resulting graphs, allowing you to see how gradually changing the phase affects the crossover, and that lets you optimize the phase alignment between the speakers and the subs. Okay.
Yep. So if you have ever read through my 12-step guide to setting up dual subwoofers, this is more or less automating the process, not for dual subs, but for integrating the subwoofer output with the main speakers.
Yeah.
But it's basically that same process where you change the phase just a little bit, measure, change it a little bit, measure, rinse and repeat. It's just a trial and error process. But now you get a visual representation of, oh, when the phase of the subwoofer output is adjusted this little bit, and I get that graph, and you can see it gradually changing, and you'll notice that where the subwoofer and the speakers cross over, typically in the 80 hertz range, but it might be wherever the crossovers were set in your particular setup, that it does change that pattern right in that crossover region, depending on how the phase is set. And now you get this visual indication. You can optimize that, because pretty much in most of the other room correction auto setups that we do, there is a somewhat of a phase alignment going on, but it's just relying on that initial time alignment. You play the little ping out of each channel, and it calculates, okay, well, if it took this long from when the signal was sent to when the microphone received it, that's how far away that speaker must be, and it just aligns them all so that if all the speakers were to play the same ping at the same time, it should all arrive at the microphone at the same time. That's the basic time alignment. It isn't necessarily the optimal phase alignment, particularly in bass producing things where we're not just getting a direct sound from the sound producing speaker or subwoofer directly to the microphone. It's going to be reflected sound within the room. So happy to see this. I think that's a great advancement. I think little by little, as processing power inside of AV receivers continues to go up, that eventually we're going to encroach on Arcos, right? That's the end game, is getting to Arcos, just brute forcing this thing and having 16 microphones set up and measuring simultaneously across the entire listening area, and just trial and error brute forcing ourselves into perfect optimization. So this is one step on that path.
Okay, Colin. Colin had a great tip to share after hearing about Infinite Gary's wanting to use his Apple TV to play podcasts or streaming music in the background, but seemingly needing to have his TV powered on in order for that to work. These are comments, by the way, from listeners. Yes. Sorry if I didn't mention that. Colin wanted to do the same thing a while back, and when he researched it, he found that HDMI's copy protection requires a sync device to be active in order for a source device to send a signal. That seemed to line up, as Gary tried our suggestion to make sure HDMI CEC was off for all his devices, but that didn't make any difference, and his TV still needed to be on for his Roku Ultra as well, so it wasn't just the Apple TV. So Colin suggests pretty much all TVs have a picture off or screen off command buried somewhere in their user menus. The TV remains powered on, but it makes the screen go completely blank. In the case of Gary's Pioneer Curo Plasma, the manual says it's within the power control section of the menu. So go to energy save, and then you can select picture off. Press the home menu button after selecting picture off, and the screen will go blank.
Yeah.
So, there you go.
That was great. I mean, I was aware of seeing that command because I looked through the menus of displays and I've seen that command of picture off or screen off. But it didn't click in my mind to mention that when we were talking about Infinite Gary's question on this. And that's a wonderful suggestion from Colin because, I mean, he figured out that's what he had to do on his. The TV needs to remain powered on, but he didn't want to actually have the image on screen. And in the case of a plasma, potentially burning in an image or something like that. So that's great. It is a setting that exists in Pioneer Kuros, and that's how you get it. Go to that energy saving and turn the picture off.
So Zach wrote this previously when his whole family was being bothered by their LG C1 OLED. It was automatically dimming itself to the point that darker scenes lost all detail. So he suggested some settings changes, and he wanted to give those some time before reporting back. Rob suspected that maybe the motion eye care setting was to blame, but that was already turned off. We did suggest a number of setting changes, but the one that seems to have fixed things was the OLED pixel brightness setting. Rob said for STR, keep it at 40 or lower. Otherwise, automatic brightness limiter kicks in, and sure enough, that seems to have been the case. It was set at 45. And ever since lowering it to 40, they haven't noticed the automatic dimming problem anymore, so thanks for the suggestion. What? Ever. So stupid.
Isn't it great that you're watching something and then it just goes, yeah, I'm just going to make this dimmer on you. You know, just in case. Isn't that a wonderful thing to do? With a setting at its default, like 45 I actually think is lower than the default, so we had already lowered it, but just like not 5 clicks enough. Yeah, right. Fantastic stuff. I
know you and I are like exasperated by this stuff, but I've been in people's houses and watched their TV brightness change in front of my eyes. And sitting next to them, and they're just like, what? Why are you looking at me like that? I'm like, your TV just did something? Like, oh, I didn't notice it. I'm like, what do you mean you didn't notice it? It just, what do you mean?
Anyway, thank you for the update.
Sorry for the
Happy to know that it worked out, Zach, and that your family is no longer bothered by it, because that's the main thing.
Mark, the amp on his subwoofer blew about a year ago, and they initially said it would be $250 to replace it, so it sat unused for the past year. Then he emailed them again, and I don't know who them are.
Well, he didn't say. Yeah. No, not SVS. We know specifically not SVS. Okay. But,
He emailed them again last week, and now they're willing to replace the amp for free. He can't be sure, but he wonders if SVS's service has persuaded other brands to be a bit more generous as well. Also, he highly recommends The Losers from 2010 as a sleeper home theater hit. The Losers.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it all. I know Zoe Saldana's in it. I know Chris Evans is in it. That's about it. I don't know much else.
So Googling it shortly.
Sure. I don't know if it's available to stream anywhere or whatnot. Being that old, it probably is from somewhere. But anyway, yeah, I have no idea if I don't know what other subwoofer brand Mark is referring to, because he didn't mention the brand, didn't want to put them on blast or anything like that. I have no idea if the way SVS has been handling things has had an influence on other brands, or if this was a one-off anomaly, or who knows what all was going on there. But I'd like to think that as good service is rewarded by loyalty from customers, that many companies would say, yeah, you know what? Treat people right and they come back and they're happy. So there you go. All good stuff.
I can't tell if this Idris Elba, isn't it?
Okay.
Chris Evans, Zoe Saldana, other people that I recognize. All right. Whatever. Sure.
Question time.
Jonathan in the CDEN 4.0. I feel like that number keeps changing. For a long time now, even before the basement flood that forced Jonathan to redo the CDEN theater, he wanted to have an audio calibration pro come over, boy, my eyes, over and really tweak his sound system to perfection. So last week, he had one of the longtime well-known members of AVS Forum over to his place. The one thing that made Jonathan feel a bit more comfortable was that this AVS Forum member is in full agreement with our methods for optimizing subwoofers. He was happy to see that Jonathan's dual SVS PC2000 Pro subs were connected in mono, and while Jonathan only sent one sample of before and after graphs that were taken at the main seat, he can assure us that the measured results in the other seats were very, very uniform in the base. So all that seems to be in good order. He was told that his existing measurements, after simply running Odyssey with his default settings, were already pretty darn good. But nevertheless, they spent well over 5 hours painstakingly taking measurements and making small tweaks. Jonathan says he never would have had the patience to do all of that by himself, so he's happy to have paid someone else to do it. So at the end of it all, Jonathan says he cannot honestly claim to understand all of the adjustments that were made to his Odyssey target curve via the Odyssey editor app, but from what he recalls of what was explained to him, and this is number one, the volume setting on the subwoofers themselves was increased quite a bit. Then the phase on just one of the subs was adjusted. Sure, whatever. The target response for the tweeters was lowered. The entire, number three, the entire target was aiming for a more uniform gradual tilt, higher in the bass, lower in the treble, versus the basically ruler flat line that was being targeted before. So as mentioned, Jonathan shared just the before and after graphs from his main seat. Afterwards, he listened and he thought it sounded fantastic. There was tons of bass, but he would struggle to quantify the improvement. Regardless, he's happy with the results. He has no intention to touch anything now, leave these settings alone. But since he also wants a better understanding, he just like our input on what was done, the before and after graphs, and what we think about it all. So if you're looking on YouTube, there is I guess the before graph here is pretty flat.
With the before. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with a bit of a treble lift above 10K, maybe, I would say. Yeah,
possibly.
A little bit. It's hard to really tell, and then definitely a little bit extra bass at the low end. Which is
so one thing I'm not sure of
if it's taking that reference level or not.
That's right. Yeah, because he did mention in his email that he typically listened at -15 on the master volume setting. That's just normally for movies. That's what he finds comfortable, was listening at -15. I think that this might have been with the volume dial at -10. That was just putting some clues together from the email and then some of the things that were mentioned in that. So I do know that Jonathan had Odyssey Dynamic EQ active in the before, and we're showing the before on the screen right now. So if all of that is true, if the volume dial were set at -10, this was setting an 85 dB reference signal, but the master volume was at -10, and then in this Odyssey result, if this does have dynamic EQ on, and we're seeing this basically 10 decibel rise in the bass of the before measurement, that all lines up. I'm not sure if that's true. It's also possible Jonathan just put in a plus 10 dB boost to the subwoofer trim level. That's entirely possible. I'm not sure. But if that was with dynamic EQ on and the master volume turned down to -10, all of that would kind of line up, and these are the sort of results we would expect to see from Odyssey. When we go over to the after graph, so I mean, first of all, we're only seeing the graph from the main seating position. It does look as though, all of the speaker channels were brought into a little bit tighter tolerance than even the before. But we don't know what the other seats look like, so it's possible. This is pure speculation. It's possible that at the main seat there's a tighter tolerance, but at other seats it's actually a little bit worse than what the Odyssey results were. But maybe it's the case that it's a tighter tolerance all the way across. That's certainly possible. But aiming for this bit of a high frequency roll off, and then this very obvious rise in the bass. So, I mean, my take on it is this sort of general tilt, where the treble is a little bit lower, the bass is a little bit higher, even at full reference volume, that would be the target. I mean, that is the sort of general target that Dirac and Anthem ARC are both aiming for, and they're not coming at that just because they decided that's what they're going to do. That's based on Harman research that indicates, people often get mistaken when they're talking about the Harman research as though there's something like objective about it. The Harman listening tests are a subjective test. They're collecting opinions and then drawing trend lines based on a wide array of listeners listening to controlled experiments. But it is still coming back with a subjective result of this is what people preferred, or this is what people thought sounded most natural or sounded most linear, or whatever it is. But that sort of general tilt of a little bit of a roll off in the highs, a general tilt through the mid-range, and then a rising bass, that is more or less the consensus where people have landed on what makes sense, what most people find to be natural and pleasing in a playback system. That is assuming speakers that themselves measure flat in an anechoic chamber, but then bringing them into a listening room, people prefer and expect this little bit of a rise. So what we're seeing in what was targeted in the after results, that is, there's nothing unusual or out of the ordinary there. It is what I would expect to see targeted from a Dirac or an Anthem correction as well. If you look at the basic default target curves that Odyssey has, at full reference volume, it is a pretty darn flat line.
Yeah.
They don't have this rise in the bass. And there's the side that criticizes that, saying, hey, look at the Harman research. People tend to say there should be a rise in the bass. There is a flip side to all of this, though, which is, if we're if we're doing this more as a bit of a thought experiment, right? If we're saying, okay, the speaker, we put it into an anechoic chamber where we take it to a wide open field. There's no reflections. So the ratio of direct sound that reaches the mic versus the reflected sound that reaches the mic is infinite. It is only direct sound. There's no reflected sound. And we expect that to measure as close to a ruler flat line as we can. Whatever the signal says to play, that is all that should play. We bring any speaker like that into any room, and there's going to now be reflected sound that reaches the microphone. And we would anticipate that because bass sound waves simply take longer to develop, and because high frequency waves are easily disrupted and easily weakened, that we would expect to see like a tilt. That's a very expected thing. When they say that's what sounds natural and normal to us in a room, I don't dispute that whatsoever. That is exactly what I would expect a ruler flat output to look like in any room, and it will change a bit depending on the size of the room and how reflective or absorptive the room itself is, the degree of that tilt, but I would expect to see that. So the question then is, it's more theoretical, right? What are we expecting to measure at the seat? Because the big variable we don't know, and it is a variable, is the people who are mastering the content, what was their room curve like? And that changes, and we don't know. And there isn't an industry-wide standard that says every dubbing stage and every mixing studio has exactly this curve to their room. And if we wanted to be the most accurate of accurate that is theoretically possible, we'd somehow have to know what the room curve was of the what was used for the particular piece of content we're listening to and match our system to that. Because when they were making decisions about, do I turn the bass up or down here? Do I turn the treble up or down here? This particular sound, do I make it louder or quieter in the mix? They were making those decisions based on whatever their room curve was. So unless we perfectly match that, we can never say we're hearing exactly what the people who mastered it are hearing. So then it is, okay, what do we want to aim for in our place? Do we aim for, okay, this is what the signal said to do, and I just want what reaches my listening position to be exactly what the signal said to do, which would mean I'm targeting a flat line at my seat? Or do I say, well, the people who made this content, they're figuring this is being played back in a room, so they're expecting there to be some kind of room curve, or expecting us to just have something that approximates the room curve they were hearing, and therefore that bass should be a little bit elevated and that treble should be a little bit rolled off. The fact of the matter is, there is no hard and fast right or wrong to that answer.
How many times have we seen B&W speakers in mixing studios, and you're like,
absolutely.
Who mixes on those? I mean, those
is exactly one of the reasons why people will argue, well, that's the speakers you should use. Yeah. Well, for that content, maybe
for the content that's mixed in that literal studio, okay.
Yes.
I guess I have to buy
you'd also have to match that room. There is another side of this, too, that I wanted to bring up, which is when we're talking about treating the room, because that is related to all of this. And there is this pretty pervasive school of thought now. Certainly if you're listening to what Gene is saying on the Audioholics channel and having Anthony Grimani in there, and he's, talking about his approach to what he's targeting when they're doing room treatments, they're aiming for very, very uniform decay times across all frequencies until you get into the low bass where you can't really control that anymore. But throughout the mid-range and treble, they're aiming for a very, very even decay time, which is why, they're suggesting this mix of absorption and diffusion, and we get so many questions about that. Whereas, what Tom and I often do in our own rooms and what we suggest is like absorption only. And if you do that, what you'll end up seeing is a tilt. You'll end up seeing a tilt where the decay times of the treble, the higher frequencies, you have lower decay times. In other words, there's less reflected treble energy than there is in the mid-range and then into the bass. We see a tilt in our decay times if we basically do an absorption-only room treatment versus specifically measuring and adjusting our room treatment so that we have a very flat decay time. So those two things, if you have a sort of tilted frequency response, meaning what's coming out of your speakers is a tilted response where the treble is coming out quieter than the mid-range, and the mid-range is coming out quieter than the bass. That's what the speakers are actually putting out into the room. But then you have a super flat decay time, versus if you have the speakers put out super flat frequency response that arrives at your seat, but the decay time is tilted, the end result of what your brain interprets is pretty similar, because our brain is going, well, just it's putting together like the sound power, right? Which expands over time. It's not just the moment that it arrived, that first up and down sine wave. It's the over the entire time, it's putting together the direct and the reflected sound. So in Tom's and my sort of approach of having a tilted decay time, because we're tending to use absorption only, we're getting less reflected sound in the treble versus direct sound because more of it is being absorbed. Versus if you're putting out less treble to begin with because you have a tilted frequency response, but then the reflected sound is even, whether it's mid-range or treble, you sort of end up at the same place in terms of how much do your eardrums end up moving across time, right? You either started quieter but reflected longer, or you started louder but reflected shorter. And how much your brain says, okay, how much are my eardrums moving? You end up at a similar place. So, I mean, none of that really, we're not going to suggest changing what was done there. If you're happy with the results, that's of course the main thing. There's nothing unusual about what was done here. And if your room is tuned to have very even decay times, we're going to agree that sounds, or at least I'm going to agree, that that's going to sound really, really good. So that's my long-winded way of covering all the topics that come to mind when I see something.
I mean, you can just look at these graphs and go, I mean, they're just really not that different.
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, if you,
sonically, how much? If you walked back in this room and you said, "It sounds good,"
yes,
it sounded good before, and it still sounds good. I can't tell you if it sounds better, but it definitely doesn't sound worse. I don't know if you felt like you got your mind, but you got different because you can see the graphs
too.
Right. You got peace of mind as well. Let's go to the next question because I'm already done with this one. So he says this is his big question. Odyssey Dynamic EQ was turned off. He mentioned how he typically listens with the master volume at -15. He was instructed to listen to most content at -10 after these adjustments with Dynamic EQ off. Boy, that would have been a red flag if someone had told that to me. I'm going to be honest with you. That would have been like, I no longer want you to touch my stuff.
Well, spoiler alert, I have an easy compromise. So,
yeah.
But
anyways,
we'll get to that.
Since we are always saying that to keep Dynamic EQ on, Jonathan is sure we'll have something to say about that. Have at it. Okay, so this is best case scenario, I guess. Well, I guess there's better than this, but I'm assuming this person knows what they're doing. Okay, because they spent 5 hours doing it. So if nothing else, they did something. If he's saying keep Dynamic EQ off, what he's saying is I have already basically tuned these speakers so that the bass is even when you're getting a signal through, and it's reference level is what reference level is supposed to be, which means 0 on the volume knob should be reference level. I have tuned it so that the bass will sound right at -10 dB.
That's more or less what's being said there.
So if you turn on Dynamic EQ, you will now overboost the bass because Dynamic EQ will say, oh, you're 10 dB lower than reference, which means I have to adjust the curves of equal loudness, which we've talked about so many times, so that you can hear the bass the way that you're supposed to hear it here. But because it's already been tuned for -10 dB, you now can't. It'll overblow the bass.
But here's where I can mention my easy compromise. Because Odyssey Dynamic EQ has an additional setting within it called the reference level offset. And one of the options in the reference level offset is 10 decibels. There's 5 dB, 10 dB, and 15 dB. And the great news is what that reference level offset is saying, because it's not super clear just from the way that it's described in the manual or the numbers you actually see in the setting. What those numbers are saying, the 5, 10, or 15, is that if you turn the master volume down to -5 and have the reference level offset set at 5, now Odyssey Dynamic EQ does nothing until you turn the mastered volume lower than -5, or What you're going to do, what we're going to suggest you do, is turn Odyssey Dynamic EQ back on, but set the reference level offset to 10. Because if what has been adjusted here is the curve that you want to hear when your master volume is set at -10, this is what's going to sound good. Now, if you turn the master volume lower than -10, Dynamic EQ can be active. It will boost the bass further than what has already been done in this target curve, but only if you turn the master volume lower than -10. Everywhere from -10 and up, Odyssey Dynamic EQ is not going to do anything if you set the reference level offset to 10. So that's what I would recommend doing here, because there's going to be some times and some content where you want to turn it lower than -10, but you just want to be that -10 is now where everything is the way I've adjusted it, and Odyssey Dynamic EQ only kicks in if I turn the volume lower than -10. So you can do that. That's what I would suggest doing. Yeah, that destroys nothing that was adjusted manually, doesn't touch any of that. It's all good. It's only if you turn something down even lower than that, it's going to essentially retain what you're already hearing with this manual adjustment,
right,
but it gives you the freedom to turn the volume down.
I definitely wouldn't have wanted him to do that, though.
Well, I mean, where this makes sense to me is the approach that's been done here, this manual targeting that has been done, this is a target that could be used across every room correction program. That's where this could be considered beneficial, is that if you change to Dirac, or you change to YPow, or you change to Anthem room correction, or whatever it is that you change to, you could use this same target curve to have this similar experience across all of them. Like I say, the Dirac and the ARC default curves already look closer to this than Odyssey's default target curve. So this is a more universal approach to adjusting the room correction. It's something that would work whether your system has curves of equal loudness or not. But we're saying, since your system does, let's just do the thing where it destroys nothing and only comes into play if you turn down the volume even further, because you're able and allowed to do that with the Odyssey system.
George. First up, George wanted to give us an update on his make-do theater room, since a lot of what's in there now are AVRant recommendations. It's a spare bedroom that would be roughly 11.5 feet wide by 10 feet front to back, but the front left corner has a 45-degree angle, and there's a closet on the right that has doors removed to make the room a bit larger. There are French doors on the left wall, and he has his love seat set up to be 7.5 feet from a 77-inch OLED. There's one window on the back wall completely blacked out. The ceiling is sloped, 8 feet at the back, 10 feet at the front. This is a very strange room. It looks like...
I mean, if it didn't have the 45-degree angle cut off in the front left corner, and it didn't have the closet open, it would almost be a square.
Yeah, it would
but
be
it's got the front left corner chopped off at a 45-degree angle, making it a bit smaller that way, and then it's got the closet on the right wall at the back that's opened up, so it's a little bit of an L shape because of that.
Man, that's a weird picture, dude. It must have been a what do you call it?
So Tom's referring to this next picture. It's a panorama picture that has made the TV look as though it has a bulge in it.
And the doors look like they come into it at an
right.
angle on the inside. Yes, but they're actually on a flat wall.
This is a panorama as he was rotating about a small square room, turning it all into a flat image that has some optical distortions in it because of that. Yes.
So on our recommendations, he contacted Geek. There are already some decorations in the room, as well as guitars hanging on the angled corner, so aesthetics are a consideration and placement options are a bit limited. He wound up getting 2 soffit bass traps, 2 monster bass traps with flex range. I don't know what those are.
That's the membrane on the front of it to tune it even lower. Yep.
The 4 bass traps go in the 4 available corners, 2 of which are within what would have been the closet. Then you got 2 acoustic art panels, one on the back wall, beside the blacked out window, and the other on the only other available wall space on the right. He says that even though he's had rooms dedicated to being home theater before, this is the first time he's putting any real effort into acoustic treatments. So any comments on all of that? I mean, it sounds like you put it everywhere you could. So that's
which is exactly what we would have said.
Kind of what I would have done if I were you. So
that's what Gig said too. I mean, I'm in full agreement. They obviously said, "Hey, man, go after the bass first," and you did that. We're going to put these bass traps wherever they can go because our options are limited. You did that. And then, I mean, ideally, I'd have a panel on your back wall that's like behind your head, but there's a window right there.
Yeah, I
it's
can't
a little
really
bit
see it here. Yeah. But
yeah,
yes.
you can't really see it, but it's a little bit tricky. So I mean, again, you've done what you can. You've got some treatment on the back wall. You got some treatment on the side wall where you can. Ideally, I'd have some treatment on that 45-degree angle wall, but it's already taken up where you've hung your guitars and whatnot. So like this all makes sense. I don't think there's anything out of whack here. And reduce some decay time.
The panoramic picture does not have the panels in it. Right?
No, they're not up yet.
Okay.
In that picture.
All right.
That was just so we could see there is decoration and other stuff in this room, so it's not completely free reign as to where these panels go, and that's completely reasonable. We gotta live in the real world. That's what GIK is great at addressing, and they're like, hey, go after what you can, and that's what you've done, and I'm thumbs up all the way.
So he's got a 77-inch OLED, and the source he uses most is his Apple TV 4K. Both of these can do 4K 60 with HDR, but his AV receiver is older. It's a Denon X4000, so that has HDMI 1.4 and cannot pass through anything more than 4K 30 SDR. Mm-hmm. His speaker configuration is 5.2 with RBH speakers up front, Elec Debut 2.0 on-wall speakers as surrounds, and a pair of SVS SB2000 Pro subs, one on the front wall, one on the back wall slightly offset from the center, which is about as good as you can do, and that they will absolutely destroy this room. So
perfectly reasonable. Yes.
Could he spend $0 and get away with using the audio return channel? Connecting the Apple TV 4K directly to his OLED will let him enjoy HDR, but then he'd be limited to the audio side of things, right? That's correct. You could use audio return channel. You could also use optical, which would give you about the same resolution.
Yeah, it'd be about the same thing. Yeah.
Well, honestly, I would go for the optical.
Oh, okay.
And only because audio
then
return
you can keep
channel,
HDMI CEC turned off.
Yeah. I cannot tell you how many questions we have gotten or I have seen which start off with, I've had my stuff hooked up this way for a very long time. Everything was worked fine, and now the audio return channel doesn't work anymore, and I don't know what I did. And the answer is no one knows what you did because it's just HDMI, and that's what happens. And I hate to say that, but it's true. So I would just say if you're getting about the same resolution, go ahead and stick with with optical. In my mind, now obviously your next course of action here is a receiver upgrade.
Well, that's going to be the next question.
That, but
yeah,
for now, I what are you missing? You're missing Atmos, which you don't care about because you don't have the speakers.
Because the 5.2 set up yet.
You're missing True HD and DTS Master Audio,
which an Apple TV is not outputting anyway.
Right, so you're really not missing much.
No, I mean, all that's happening is, just to make it super duper clear, what you would be able to get out of an ARC connection or an optical connection from an Apple TV that is itself plugged directly into your OLED, and then the OLED is plugged in either via its optical port or via its HDMI-ARC port to your Denon. What you would be getting is Dolby Digital 5.1.
Right.
Because LG OLEDs don't do DTS pass-through.
Yeah.
So you're not getting DTS, although there were exceptions in older models, and I'm not exactly sure what model year of OLED he has, but the safe answer to say is you will definitely be able to get Dolby Digital 5.1, and that's for the most part what you are going to be listening to. I suppose there's the scenario where if he were doing like disk backups and not using the Plex app, but using the Infuse app, the Infuse app is capable of itself decoding Dolby True HD and DTS HD Master Audio and sending it out as 5.1 or 7.1 PCM, just uncompressed PCM. That would not work if you're trying to use the HDMI ARC port or the optical port. Again, with those, you're just sticking with Dolby Digital 5.1. That's the safe answer. But that's sort of the one exception. And if you are not using the Infuse app on your Apple TV to play back disc backups, then everything else, I'm like, I think you're fine, because most streaming services are sending it in as Dolby Digital Plus. Dolby Digital Plus is easily converted to just regular Dolby Digital. Dolby Digital can have a higher bit rate than we're used to from, say, a DVD. It's able to go to a higher bit rate. So if Dolby Digital Plus is coming in at a higher bit rate, a lot of that is going to be retained when it gets converted to just regular Dolby Digital. So I would say, in your setup, because it isn't Atmos, unless you're using the Infuse app, I'm really not worried if you were to just plug that Apple TV directly into your OLED and either use ARC or the optical output. I would say you're not giving up much at all.
So he just want to downgrade from Odyssey Multi-Q XT32, which he already has with his X4000. He bought that from Accessories for Less, so he's perfectly happy buying from them again. Is there a reasonably priced Denon that would help him keep XT32 while giving him all the latest HDMI spec support? Again, I want to stress, it's not going to make a difference for the most part. You're not going to really hear anything, I don't think.
You're saying if you went to, say, Multi-Q XT rather than XT32.
No. I mean, upgrading your receiver. And then
upgrading your receiver, full stop.
It's just, I mean, if you're only connecting the Apple TV 4K to it, I don't see why you would upgrade. I don't see a need for you to upgrade right now. There and only that's because you're telling us that's all you connect to it. Now, if you're also connecting an Xbox Series X or another
PlayStation 5
or a player of any kind where you're trying to get lossless audio out of it, okay, then maybe there's some benefit there. But if really all you're ever doing is watching your Apple TV 4K on here, I would not buy a new receiver right now. And I know that sounds crazy, but there's going to be so little audio upgrade and no video upgrade that it's a complete, in my opinion, a complete waste of money on your part, especially considering receivers are awfully hard to come by these right now, and everything. A
lot of stuff is back ordered. That's
that's a lot. You're going to be paying premium prices, even through Accessories for Less. You're going to be paying premium prices, and you're going to be and you're going to have long wait times and everything else. Why, if you're not really going to get much of a benefit, why not just sit on this money and wait until more supply chain issues get figured out, more receivers with HDMI 2.1 come out, you actually get something that can take advantage of all these things. Yeah, I don't think I would upgrade right now if I were you, but I'm sure Rob has some opinions here. Rob, take your time describing them because I did not fill my water cup.
Okay, so I mean, of course, the other thing is if he had plans to upgrade his system to Atmos, which his X4000 does not do, that would be the other somewhat compelling reason why you might get a new AV receiver. But yes, unless you actually have sources that need to utilize HDMI 2.1, just waiting on what you have wouldn't be the worst idea. But to answer the question as asked, so I mean, the answer to exactly what he asked, what would be the most affordable option to get that still has Odyssey Multi-Q XT32, that would be the Denon X3700H, which even at Accessories for Less is going for $1,300 right now. So, I mean, it says reasonable price. Maybe that's reasonable to him. I don't think it's utterly ridiculous, but that's a fair bit of money. Now, that would be a perfectly good choice if your plan is to go to Atmos, because if you're going to, we of course always say we like you to have 4 overhead speakers, not just 2. So that would be the model in Denon's lineup that gets you to 9 amplifiers built in and the ability to expand to 11 speakers if you want to add an additional 2-channel amp. In your setup, we certainly are not going to, because we are not going to put surround back speakers into your setup. So we would be stopping at 5.2.4 speaker configuration, which the X3700H could do all on its own. So that would be the answer if you want to get something that is available brand new that is the same price, but if you were for some reason interested in trying Dirac instead of Odyssey, there is Integra's DRX 3.4. That is the Integra version of the Onkyo 7100 for $200 more than the Onkyo 7100, but the Onkyo 7100 is out of stock everywhere, whereas Crutchfield has the Integra DRX 3.4 available for that same $1,300 price point. So that one stops at 9 speakers. It cannot be expanded to 11. It goes up to 9, and that is it, but that's all we would ever use in this room. So both of those are $1,300 options. Both of those give you HDMI 2.1, although the X3700H only has a single HDMI 2.1 port, whereas the Integra DRX 3.4 has 3 HDMI 2.1 inputs. to get to something that I would say is like a very reasonable price, it would mean not having XT32, and it would mean stopping at 7 speakers, and that would be Denon's X2700H, which is available from Accessories for Less for $750. So to get yourself below $1,000, you're giving up those things. I don't know if that makes any sense. That also has one HDMI 2.1 port. So that's the answers.
All right. If you hear a weird clicking noise, Felix is chewing on the bone, and
which is the big doggy.
He's the big
doggy in Tom's house.
Yes, he is. Sounds like somebody chewing ice. I don't know if you guys can hear that or not, but
I can't hear much. There's
he's
a
going
little
to
bit
town.
of something.
Dan, I appreciate her input. First of all, let me go back here real quick. What's this guy's name? I'm scrolling back up. George. Thank you, Tim. I have coffee delivered.
Tom's just all over the place this podcast.
I am all over the place. George, again, I just want to stress, I don't think you should buy a receiver right now.
Sure.
For
We've given all the caveats on when it might make sense.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why you would. And even if you're like, well, I do have a Ultra HD Blu-ray player, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, is audio really going to make that much of a difference?
I mean, if you set the Ultra HD Blu-ray player to output 24p instead of 60, which you probably should, then that's going to go through your X4000 just fine. Although, no, wait, not the HDR.
Not the HDR. No.
Ah, dear.
But
there you go.
Yes, there definitely would be a benefit audio-wise for that. But I just, it's a lot of money, my man. You wait a year, and those prices are coming down. Those price, like those HDMI, those receivers that only have one HDMI 2.1 input, you're going to be able to just scoop them up in the bargain bin. You're going to they're going to be BOGOs. You're going to buy one, get one. They're going to be so cheap in a year. And if you're the kind of person like me who is never going to take advantage of all those gaming features, I just don't game in here. I just don't game with my TV. Then, yeah. Dan, appreciate our input regarding his wide open living room setup in his house that is currently under construction. And again, here's some pictures of wood. He had wondered aloud why there are horizontal braces with all of his... We had wondered.
We asked him, yes.
Yeah. All of his vertical studs. That's because their walls will be finished with vertical shiplap boards rather than drywall. That's the look they want. Shiplap. I said it right. And shiplap boards aren't wide enough to span the vertical wood studs, so cannot be secured with just glue. So horizontal blocking is for securing the shiplap. Now his question. We recommend monoprice alpha in-ceiling speakers along with their metal back cans. We also mentioned that if he installed some monoprice alpha in-wall speakers in some of the other rooms for whole house audio, that putting in backer boxes with 1 cubic foot of internal volume would be the way to go. Felix, my man, you're just getting at it.
I am hearing some rumblings in the back.
He is not messing around down there. He's after that bone like it's made of ham. However, looking at those metal back cans for the in-ceiling speakers, those are clearly smaller than 1 cubic foot internally. So he's just trying to understand when should he use the metal back cans and when should he build a backer box, and why aren't those two things the same size in terms of internal volume? Well, I mean, I don't know why they're not the same size. Are they not the same size? I mean, is the internal volume really that much different?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the internal volume of the back cans is less than 1 cubic foot. And that's simply because these are the retrofit version. These are the ones where you could drill the hole that's for the size of your speakers into the ceiling and then recess these into them, without having to open up a larger hole and then patch the drywall.
So one is the recommendation for how to make the speaker sound the best, which is the 1 cubic foot, and the other one is the one that we can actually is the compromise.
Yes. So yeah, the back cans are an internal volume compromise. That we have not said explicitly and made clear.
Is true.
But that is the case. It is for code. You've got to have them for code, and it's for reasonability of if I'm going to install these things, you can use the other back cans or back boxes that are sold for some speakers that are larger and have the larger internal volume. Those can be used for in-ceiling speakers, but it's just a lot more hassle using the back cans that are designed to just, connect to the back of them, and you can put the drywall up and then fit the speaker into the ceiling with the back can already attached. That seals it in, lines up with code, and prevents, just the open back of the speaker blasting sound into whatever the opening is. So yeah, it is a little bit of a compromise, though, to use those back cans in terms of, just what would be ideal for the
So
sound
can he
quality.
just have his contractor build the back box
Yes,
for the
you
ceiling
could.
ones? That's
Yes,
because
you
if
could.
if you're doing
That's,
this
I think, what
anyways,
he's getting at, because
Yeah.
I think he's worried about absolute sound quality, and that's a good point. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, everything's opened up right now, including his ceiling. His ceiling's opened up, so he's like, if we're going for maximum sound quality, would we have the larger internal volume? And to make it explicit, yes. Yes, you would. And if you're going to have that built anyway, then now's the time to do it. And that's
You know what these guys are going to do, man, is they're just going to slap together. They're going to figure out what you want, what size it is, and they're going to have one dude at their or gal at their shop. Like, okay, this is what we want you to build. This by this by this by this, and then this is how we want you to build it. We want a hole this size, and then boom, that's what that person's going to do.
Yep.
We need 25 of them, or 30 of them, and they're just going to have them stacked up, and then they're going to install them in your walls exactly.
It
where
is
you want
not
to be.
complicated.
No, it's not. Okay, and again, this is something I cannot stress enough. When we say something like it's not complicated or it's not that hard, what we mean is it's not complicated and it's not that hard for people who know what the heck they're doing. Okay, you asked me to build a 1 cubic foot back box that goes inside of a wall or a ceiling. I am going to take some time, and it is going to come out very wrong. Almost certainly, the first or second or third time. I'm amazed by people who can just like do this. I had it like when we talk about me expanding this room, which was an L shape, into a rectangle, so that we could have the home theater in here, have it be a more reasonable size. The guy who did that came in, took some measurements, wrote things down on a piece of 2x4 that was like a scrap piece of 2x4, and said, "Show this to the guys at Lowe's."
Right.
And I did, and they went, okay. And they loaded up a cart thingy with a whole bunch of crap, and then I put it in my car and brought it home. I had no idea. I was like, how did you do? As far as I was concerned, that was magic. That was as magic as it gets. So yes, this is not complicated to people who know what they're doing. But then again, I've got people right now who I'm working with who, I have been talking to them about their speakers and their stuff. And I came over, I looked at stuff, and I left some stuff there. I'm like, okay, just do this one thing. And the guy came back to me. He's like, I don't know how to do any of this. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, I just need you to run the wires through the wall to the speaker. He goes, oh yeah, I can do that. I'm like, do that. I will do everything else. He's like, I can't do any of the rest of it. I'm like, I don't need you to do the rest. I need you to get out of my way and let me do the rest of it. But I'm not doing that part. Like I don't go in attics in Florida. I don't go in crawl spaces full stop. But this guy's like, it's no problem for me. I do that all the time. Like, okay, that's fine. You do that part, and then I can do all the audio part. So believe me, what seems easy to one is an impossible task to another. And I recognize when things are impossible for me. So,
but just to mention, I was referring to using the metal back cans that are available from Monoprice for the in-ceiling model. He had mentioned that some of the speakers in his whole house audio system might be in-wall. They'd be the rectangular version, not the circular version. So Monoprice just doesn't have a rectangular back can or back box available for you to just purchase. So that would be, obviously, you're constructing it if you're doing the rectangular in-wall speaker versus the circular in-ceiling speaker. So that's the obvious answer there. And then, where you would use those back cans are retrofit for sure, because you don't want to have to do a whole drywall patch. You just want to use your circle saw and drill that into the ceiling, the exact diameter that you need for the opening for the speaker itself, and then those back cans will fit within it. That's the optimal place to use those.
Blake had his in-laws over to his place, and they got to watch some movies on his 7.2.4 home theater. He's got a dedicated setup with acoustically treated room, SVS speaker system with dual PB4000 subs, and an Epson projector on a 135-inch screen. So they were like, oh yeah, it's almost the same as our house. After that, his in-laws want to have an experience like that in their own home, but they do not want to allocate a dedicated room to it, and they do not want to drastically change their current TV space, which is a wide open living room that's open to the kitchen, dining area, and front sitting room. Plus, all the floors are tiled, the walls are reflective, and there's large glass doors. So what I would like is to have a car that can go 700 miles per hour, but I want it to be my minivan.
Yep.
Can you make that happen? I could, but I would need to change everything about your car. No, you can't change anything. I just want my car to go 700 miles an hour. Can you do that? The answer, of course, is absolutely not. You've lost your frickin' mind.
But let's be nice. Let's be fair. Which
hey, Blake, I'm talking to you. I'm not talking to your in-laws.
Yeah,
all right?
yeah.
First of all, no one likes their in-laws. I mean, that's like part of the deal. All right? So I get to bag on your in-laws because I'm sure you are too, just a little bit in the back. Like when they said this to you, did you spit your coffee in their face?
The eyes,
no.
The eyes might have gone wide in Blake's head. Yeah, it's possible. But I mean,
if you did a spit take when they said this, then I feel like you did your job as a good, dutiful husband.
But I mean, I completely understand that most people.
This is where most people
not
start. Yes.
Aware whatsoever of how much the room impacts what you're going to hear. I completely understand that people are like, if I buy the right speakers and I buy the right thing to power those speakers, if they even realize that speakers need to be powered by something other than the speakers themselves, if I just buy the right thing, I can hear what you're hearing.
Right.
Nobody understands how important the room is.
They think that everything else you did in that room that wasn't speakers was aesthetics.
Or just to make it look like a movie theater.
Yeah, aesthetics. They feel like it is. You did that because that's what you wanted in there. Mm-hmm. That's what your style was. They are not understanding that everything in that room is like my home theater. Everything in here is functional. Like there is nothing in this room that's just there just because. There is one bookshelf that I put in here because we were going to throw it out. I was like, I need some place to store some crap. Mm-hmm. So I threw that in the back corner. That is literally the only thing in this room that is not functional. Everything in here is functional. And people think, oh, well, what's all these black things on the wall? They're okay, shut up. All right, Blake has already tried to explain to them that without the room itself being dedicated to being a home theater, they just aren't going to be able to replicate the setup that he has. Furthermore, he's tried to explain that they could improve the acoustics of their living room. They just really don't want to make any changes or put up any panels, even decorative ones. So, first up, their TV is older now, a 720p Vizio model, so that much he knows he can be upgraded. His in-laws have said the budget isn't really an issue, although they don't want to overspend just for the heck of it. Obviously, the room can be very bright and reflective during the day, but Blake agrees with our take that OLEDs are still plenty bright. So where would we point them as far as TV upgrades go? Go ahead, Rob. Spend all their money.
Looking a little bit ahead at what I might end up recommending on the audio side of things, I would love. I mean, if they have the budget, they're going to see the improvement in picture if they get an OLED. I have zero concerns about OLEDs not being bright enough because the only people who talk about that have no idea what they're talking about when they're so worried about the nits on the spec sheet. So, I absolutely would say an OLED. I'm actually going to suggest, though, because of where you might end up going with the audio system, I'm going to point you to a Sony OLED. And I'm going to suggest getting one of the A80 series, either the A80J, which is on its way out right now, and the 77-inch size, which just eyeballing the size of the room, I think is probably what makes sense, because I think they might look at the price of the 83 versus the 77 and go, like, that's double the price to go up, 6 inches, and it doesn't quite see, like, to us who are worried about viewing angles, we're going to go, oh yeah, it's still worth it. But I think most people are going to say, yeah, the 77-inch price of $2,600 for the outgoing A80J, if you can still find one by the time you're hearing this, because that they might not be in stock anymore. But $2,600 going out is the 77-inch A80J. If that's not available, the brand new A80K that is coming in to replace at 77-inch is $3,500 right now. So if you can grab that A80J, so much the better, because that's a $900 savings if you can. So I think that's the one to get because of what I'm going to mention on the audio side.
All right. So the big question, of course, is the sound system. They already have a 5.1 Vizio soundbar, and Blake would like to suggest something that will be a noticeable upgrade, but with the understanding that it isn't going to be a reference system or equal to what he's got. I hate to break it to him, man. I wouldn't even put surround sound in here, but that's just me. His father-in-law enjoys using Google Home and Amazon's Assistant, but he hasn't dealt with a full home theater surround sound before. So Blake was wondering if they should consider Sonos. Since keeping the looks of the room unchanged is important, he was thinking of Sonos ARC Atmos soundbar up front with a pair of Sonos One surrounds and one or two Sonos subs, since Sonos can support dual subwoofers now. The Sonos setup has microphones built in, its own version of room correction, plus it already works with the voice assistant. So do we think that would be a worthwhile upgrade in his case, or would we suggest something else? my initial thought when I first looked at this train wreck of a question is Kef and their powered speakers that you could plug directly into the TV and go with that.
Now, it wouldn't be surround sound.
No.
We'd be talking a stereo setup.
I would be talking a stereo setup. I would even go so far as to take a look at and I'm not saying this to be funny like I was last week, but those Kef powered towers that we were just talking about. This is kind of the situation.
I mean, they're the tower version of the LS50 wireless, which is the bookshelf version. So yeah.
Those are the ones that would initially stand out to me, and the reason is because just ease of use. These,
and also sound quality wise, like they've got the design that's, look, it's not going to sound like your dedicated treated home theater.
No.
But you are well aware of that, you know that, but it does give you sort of the best shot of at least the sound is being dispersed evenly. It is starting out linear and even. That's the best shot you've got, given that the room acoustics aren't going to be changed in here.
I mean, they do have rugs, even though they're not, super thick looking rugs or whatever.
No,
but
they are not.
I'm thinking about, I'm wondering if those are. No, they're not. They don't look to be powered recliners, so it doesn't look like there's any way to plug.
They might be because they've got the cup holders. So those
I know,
might
but
be
if you look
recliners.
at the picture on the left, for me, the picture on the left has you can see the latch they use to.
Oh yeah, manual recline. Gotcha.
So it's a manual recline there. So I'm not sure if there's any power outlets around there, but if there is, this would be a really good opportunity to put like a. SVS 3000 micro, like on maybe even either side of this couch, and then use even though it's only like 10 feet, 12 feet, you could use their sound
their
path, wireless thing. If there is an outlet underneath or near this couch someplace, a lot of times there are, because of how big these rooms are, they sometimes put outlets on the ground. So if there's a way to get power there, I would think about doing the LS60s or LS50s, and then integrating the sub with the SVS, and then on either side, and then it's just a TV remote. So however they control the TV is how they control everything. That's my thought. I know that it's not.
I mean, that was basically
sound.
The last question. So that's great though, because I hadn't thought of that exact configuration, and I'm on board with you though, Tom. I think that's a good suggestion.
Okay.
Yeah.
What you got?
Yeah.
Okay, but before you go on, I'm sorry. I do agree with your idea, though, about Sonos. I think Sonos is a really good idea, and the reason is because Sonos is for people who have money and no attention span to try to learn anything else new. It is, from my experience with it, is very easy to use, and people get it. It's the UI is very good. You are paying, for me, Sonos, you're paying, yes, sound quality is supposedly, everybody's amazed by it, but these people aren't really being amazed. They just just anything is better than what they had. But the UI is what's important, and I agree that in this situation, Sonos sounds like a good idea. I'm not totally on board with another sound bar, but that would be fine.
Yeah. I'm not against the Sonos suggestion that you have at all. I will say, even if you got two of those Sonos subs, they are just completely gobbled up by this room. So that's, I'm a little bit, because they're so expensive and then really not worth it in this room. I'm not one of the ones who's like over the moon about Sonos' sound quality. I think it's fine. I don't think it's bad, but I'm not over the moon about it. So I have a suggestion that's along the same lines as Sonos, but it's got a little bit more home theater-ness to it, and it's got a subwoofer option that's a little bit more capable than the Sonos sub. We are not talking night and day difference. We are not talking about getting to what you have in your dedicated theater, but it's the reason I suggested Sony's OLED, and that's Sony's HDMI-ARC wireless speaker system, which I kind of poo-pooed for someone not that long ago because I didn't think it was the right solution for their room. But this setup that you're describing with your in-laws is almost exactly the situation that the HDMI-ARC excels a little bit for. The basic system that comes with just the 4 wireless speakers and the little hub that it all attaches to, that's $2,000, so we're in Sonos type pricing. To add the subwoofer to it, definitely get the larger of the two options, and that's a $700 wireless Sony sub, but it is considerably larger and more output capable than the Sonos sub. So that's a $2,700 altogether. Now, the thing why Sony is that on the back of the little hub that works with this HDA9 system, there is the S Center Out, which is specifically meant to plug into Sony TVs that turns the TV itself into the center speaker.
That's not a bad idea. Yeah.
And the A80J has the thing where the screen itself is used as the speaker, and it's actually pretty darn good. Particularly for vocals, it's very clear as the entire front surface of that 77-inch OLED becomes your center speaker and integrates with this HDA9 system. The other nice thing about this is it has a pretty good automatic setup with it. Every speaker in this HDA9 system has a microphone in it, and it uses the cumulative measurement of all the other speakers when one speaker is sending out its test tones to set everything pretty darn nicely. So if you want a system that's akin to Sonos, it's certainly priced like Sonos, but I think might deliver a little bit better results than the Sonos soundbar in this exact scenario of a room, I would consider the HDA9. Now, if you want truly better sound quality, that's where I agree with Tom's suggestion. Because I was thinking, like, could I suggest to you, this is going to end up being the last question, but we'll just answer it now. Could I suggest to you like a full-on, AV receiver, separate speakers, trying to route speaker wires everywhere or use, some kind of wireless? I'm like, it just gets to something that they don't want in this room. They want clean. They want as wireless as possible. They want easy setup and easy use. And I'm like, I'm not super keen on trying to do a traditional surround sound setup in here, which still is not going to sound like your theater. There's no way to make it sound like your dedicated theater. So I'm on board with the LS60 towers, which are expensive. They're $7,000, but they'll look nice and they'll sound nice and they'll be easy to use. Matching those with some SVS 3000 micros, that would be pretty spectacular because you can do that with the LS60 towers. They have subwoofer outputs.
Yeah.
Or I'm not against Sonos. If you want to go that way, I'm not against it. I'm just mentioning that there is that Sony HDA9 system that I think might be even a bit more flexible and better and costs about the same. Yeah.
So Blake's father-in-law has said he wants to feel the bass the way they can in Blake's home theater. Clearly that same experience isn't really possible in this living room setup. What about butt kickers? Could adding those to their recliner seating work in this case?
So not with Sonos and not with HDA9 because those don't have subwoofer outputs to send to the butt kick amplifiers.
But the
Kefs could do it.
And not only that, but the fact that you're not EQing anything because it's actually a plug and play solution. So your wireless sending out of the bass, you can just route those to one or two SVS 3000 micros, and then also route it to the butt kickers.
The butt kicker amplifier,
and then power that all from underneath whatever. Now, and I'm going to tell you not to do this, but this is really what you should do. But if you're going to go the butt kicker route, I never, ever recommend doing it without having somebody experienced it in some way first. So the only way to do that is to go to a store that has them, usually a high-end store, but sometimes you can get them at Magnolia or something, where they have a rumble seat situation. Or you can take them to a movie theater, I suppose, that has the D-Box crap that does the rumble stuff too.
Well, you're not going to get D-Box at home from butt kickers, so that would be a little bit misleading.
Right, it would be a little bit, but you could talk kind of about it. But if you end up taking it so that they can experience, but if you take them to that store and they experience it, they might very well get sucked into the whatever the salesperson there is going to tell them that they need. Oh yeah, if you want to have that experience, we can do that. We just need to buy this and this and this and this, and we'll come wire it all up for you, and they'll be perfect. So you run that risk. So I don't think you should do that. But I mean, what I would do is it depends on what direction you end up with. But like Rob said, you're going to have a hard time integrating butt kickers in the Sonos or the Sony system that he's recommending.
Well, you just can't.
Right. So it can't be done. But
yeah.
So then you're going to start thinking about other ways of, getting there. And I would always recommend just going with the subs first and seeing if that's enough before I would go directly to butt kickers. It's not the same. The feeling of bass is a natural feeling because the feeling matches the sound. Okay.
Yeah.
Trying to replicate that by shaking a couch can get you part of the way there, but in my experience, it's always a little artificial. So maybe that's enough for your in-laws. Maybe it won't be, but you won't know until they try it. And by that point, you've already modified their couches, so it becomes cooler of a thing.
The only other thought I have, because this is the last question, just saying what else could be done if none of the things that we've talked about. The only other thought that I had was if they are somehow willing to change their seating, which was never mentioned and I don't think was the plan, but there is that option of, the love sack, where it has all the speakers built into the seat
Again,
itself.
You have to be able to plug those things in.
Yeah.
But yes.
But that would be the other way to actually get a substantially different sound experience. It will only work when they are seated, but I think that's the idea. That might be a way to come at this that is, a very different approach, but actually has a better chance of getting them a result that they're going to say, oh, this is something that is completely different from our old Vizio soundbar.
Right.
So just have a look at the Lovesac seating with the built-in speaker systems. Those can have tactile transducers put into them as well. So that might be a solution, but it would mean changing their seating.
It would be, right. I think that's an actually fantastic idea. I'll be honest with you. I think that's a great idea. There is no way. So the last question, like Rob said, was if he wants to get them to get as close to his setup as possible, what could he suggest? And they're changing the room. I mean, there is no way to do it that doesn't involve changing the room. So there is no getting it close. I don't think you should try. I don't think you can do it. You need to say, I can make your system sound better. I can make your audio sound better. I can give you better sounding speakers. I can give you more bass in here. I can even make your couch shake. But without having it's like asking. There's so many metaphors I could use, but it's just not possible to do it without actually doing it. There is no way of doing it. I have the same conversation with my parents all the time. My mom keeps moving things around in the theater, and she's like, "Why doesn't the remote work anymore?" I'm like, "You put a plant. There's a plant in front of the thing that receives the remote. Where do you think it's going to go?" "Oh, I didn't know that's how that worked." I'm like, "How did you not know? We had this conversation 5 times. This is the 5th time." So believe me, I feel your pain here. I think the Lovesac idea is really quite good. We're not.
This is what it's for.
We're not really worried about sound quality. I know that they're like, oh, we want to have the same experience. No, they don't. No, they don't. If they wanted to have the same experience, they would say, I want to have the same experience. What can I do? What they want is they want to have something more than what they have in their house. And you can give them that, but it'll never be the same. Just like for them, those are the people who are like, I'll never stop going to the movies because the movies are always better than seeing something at home. Whereas I'm like, I am never going to the movies again because it's always worse than seeing something at home. So, and I think you're in that other camp as well. Infinite Gary says in his main home theater, he's using his Runco 1080p DLP projector that uses an LED light source. He's had it professionally calibrated several times and keeps it maintained. He has noticed that in a given movie, if a scene is well lit, not necessarily bright, but just a well lit scene, like a typical interior shot, then everything looks very good and very natural. And he assumes the calibrations have done their job since colors and skin tones look real, like real life. So he has no complaints there. But if that same movie switches to a very dim scene, he feels the image looks murky and lacking in detail. And if there's, say, a person's face dimly lit, it doesn't look as natural and lifelike. This is the case no matter which source he's using, but he only feels this way about his projectors, not his various plasmas or OLED flat panels. So what is about his projector that's causing this? He'd just like to understand. I mean, I would say contrast would be the number one thing that would be the problem here, and that is the blacks are not truly black, and therefore the highlights or the brights, which are not that bright, There's not that much difference between
They're
them.
only
So
a few steps above actual black, and now they have to be only a few steps above a gray.
right. So when you're comparing those to a plasma, which gets black, and an OLED, which gets really black, then yeah, it looks murky. I mean, it would be the same as if like you have two exact TVs, and one is in a room that's well lit, that's got ambient light, and one that doesn't. And you're like, what's wrong with this one in the ambient light room? It doesn't look as good. Well, it doesn't look as good because it's in the room with ambient light. This is the same sort of situation. It's the contrast or the lack thereof.
Yeah, that's the primary part of it. That would be the case regardless of which projector you were comparing to a flat panel, because even the best of them are not as black as an OLED or a plasma.
Right.
So there is that. There is one other element, though, that is specific to DLP, which is that the way DLP shows you any color, it is pulse width modulation. It is either the little tiny mirror, because each pixel is a tiny little mirror, and that mirror either reflects the lamp from the light source, in your case an LED light source. It either reflects that light out of the lens of projector or it doesn't. There are no degrees in between. It's either reflecting the light or it isn't. So the way that it creates a dim version of a color is that it only reflects that color of light through the lens for a short amount of time. So we're only talking about 24 or 60 frames per second to begin with. Now we're dividing each of those by either 256 or 1024, depending on if it's 8-bit or 10-bit color. And it's saying, okay, when this is a really dim red, it's only on for 4 or 5 of the 256 steps of the 24th of a second. Like, that's the amount of time that red light is actually coming out of the lens for a dim red, versus for a bright red, that little mirror is reflecting the light out of the lens for almost the entire 24th of a second. So you get what's called dithering, because it's on for just a teeny little fraction of a second, and then it's off, and then it's on again for just a teeny little fraction of a second. And it's literally stutter stepping how much the light is coming out of there. And for dim things, there's very little light for fractions of a frame, that's actually giving out that light. And you end up with this slightly not realistic look. That is a bit inherent to DLP in dim scenes where things look kind of waxy, or even like almost like a macro blocking type of effect, or like a little bit shimmery. It takes away from that realistic look because of the way that the image is actually produced by a DLP. So that's something where the sample and hold displays like LCD or liquid crystal on silicon or OLED, those don't have that issue because they just produce a steady amount of light for the entire frame that's being shown. It is sampled once and then held there, as opposed to dithered based on how bright the light needs to be.
All right, Joseph, if you look up corner base traps, you'll come across GIC tri-traps, panels that have beveled sides so they flush mount, or super chunk traps made out of triangles of insulation. So is that triangular shape important, or would a regular panel mounted to the corners work just as well, or maybe even better? For example, he's thinking he might put a box subwoofer in a corner and then have a rectangular base trap with the same footprint directly above it, making it look sort of like a column. Yeah, there's nothing special about that triangular shape, dude. It's just,
nope.
it just takes up less space. I mean, physical space. Then it doesn't jut into the room with the corner. There's nothing magical about it. In fact, if I remember correctly, if you take a panel, a tri-trap. So tri-traps, if you think about tri-traps, if you took a 2x4 foot panel, that's like 4 inches thick or something, and you just straddle the corner with it, the tri-trap will fit directly behind it, like flush.
Oh, okay.
It's like like really close. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it just takes up less physical room, but as far as how well it does measurement wise, it's kind of about the same. So yes, there's nothing that you can do. I mean, you can straddle the panel. You can, like what you're talking about doing is something that I often recommend people do, which is if you have a box and it's in a corner, build a trap that goes from the top of the box to the top of the corner, and then now you have a column. All right. Yep. So yeah, I think this is a perfectly fine idea, and you should absolutely
corner
do it.
bass traps do not have to be triangles. That is purely about trying to take up as little space as possible.
Right.
The reason why we talk about corner bass traps is it's just more efficient. All we're really trying to do is cover more surface area with as thick a thing as we can. And if we happen to put that into a corner, it takes up less floor space. That's all.
Yeah.
It's not that the corner is literally the best place or that triangles are the best shape. It's just an efficient way to cover a significant amount of surface area with a thick thing without taking up a ton of floor space. That happens to be the place to do it, as a corner. So there actually could be an argument made that if you made a rectangular trap that's like the footprint of a subwoofer,
Right.
which is going to be larger than like
Right.
a triangular trap, that you're actually getting even thicker, even more insulation,
that.
and it will therefore absorb to an even lower frequency. So there's an argument that the rectangular trap with the footprint of the type of subwoofers that we talk about, that's actually even better, just from a performance point of view.
Yeah.
So I don't know about Dale's is a lot of questions, or I really did want to answer Paul this week. So if we might want to,
Oh my God,
we've
he's
talked.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, let's skip down to Paul, and I think that'll probably be it.
Paul was referred to us by DJ. I don't know who that is, but thank you, whoever you are. Person.
That's right.
Strange person.
Fellow listener.
A listener who is a person. Paul has a basement setup. It's a non-rectangular room, and his theater setup is not symmetrical. Vinyl flooring over concrete, drop tile ceiling, wood panel walls. He has a 7.1.2 speaker configuration using Paradigm Premiere left, center, and right. DefTech Mythos surrounds and surround backs. Audio source in-ceiling speakers and an RSL Speedwoofer 10S sub. Did he say how big this room was? He didn't.
No, we don't know the size. No.
So it first sounds like it's too small for this room. But let's go. He recently upgraded his AV receiver from a 10-year-old Yamaha RX A720 to an Integra DRX 3.4, which is the same as the new Onkyo 7100, but adds a full set of pre-outs, it is actually available to buy, which is probably why he bought it.
That's the real handy part of it, is that you can obtain one.
Right. He mainly wanted HDMI 2.1, but of course he was also interested to hear what Dirac could do in a setup. So far, he likes his new Integra receiver, but he doesn't love it. He has run Dirac multiple times using the included mic and the Dirac app on his phone, but for his preference, he's finding that most of the time he likes to sound better when he turns Dirac off. He feels that having Dirac on makes everything sound more lifeless and less exciting. It sounds tame and controlled. I don't know what that means. And when he
those are the words you use?
I
I'm just putting them in
understand.
there.
They're in quotes, so I understand that. And when he turns Dirac off, he thinks the bass and treble come to life. He understands it's all highly subjective, but what he wants is to better understand why he's perceiving things this way, and whether what he is describing is typical after having run Dirac, or maybe things aren't actually right. He needs to do something different in order to get better results. Okay. You haven't really treated your room in any way, shape, or form, and there's a lot of reflective surfaces in here. I actually don't know. The DefTech Mythos are...
they're the on-wall, it's like the slim on-wall type of design that they have. They do have like towers within that lineup, but most of the Mythos lineup is the slim on-wall design, and that's, I think, what he has for the surrounds and surround backs.
I can't imagine that subwoofer is big enough for whatever space you have this many speakers in. It's just
quite possibly not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very good subwoofer.
It's a great sub, and I've got no problems with RSL's.
No,
the
not at all.
Speedwoofer. We recommend it.
Very good choice.
My thought here, there is a big difference between, and I'll give you a perfect example of this. I review speakers for a living. Okay, I review headphones quite often. All right. The other day, I got in my car and I was listening to music and enjoying myself, as I often do. And I realized that my sons had turned on party mode. So in my car, I have a button that's called party mode or something along. It's a Forerunner, and it has a party mode setting. And what this is meant to do is meant to make things sound much, much louder and in different parts of the car, so that you can open up the back and open up the doors, and it creates noise for the area
outside of the car,
not just for the car. So, this has been on for I don't know how long. And I'm like, oh, well, that's not right. I need to turn this off. So I turned it off. The minute I turned it off, I went, ooh, this doesn't sound very good anymore. I don't like the way this sounds. Oh, where'd all the bass go? Where'd all the treble go? What's going on here? And it's just different, and sometimes different sounds better and sometimes different sounds worse, but it always sounds different, and we never really like different. Not at first.
Sure.
We have to actually listen to it. So once I sit there and listen to it for a little while, when I turn party mode back on, suddenly I'm like, oh, God, what is actually happening to this sound? This is awful. Everything's overblown. The bass is way too loud and overbearing and everything else. This is part of what the phenomenon you're experiencing here. You're going from one to the other. One is probably less loud, just like full stop, because it's trying to control a lot of the reflections. Not reflections, but it's trying to control how even the sound is in the room, which is almost certainly taming some of the high frequencies and the low frequencies, the problems that you're having. And it's just not sounding the same. So when you switch on DRAC, suddenly you're like, well, this doesn't sound as lively and interesting, and therefore I don't like it. But as we often suggest, you don't know what you don't know. I don't know. I don't know most of the time. So play a sweep.
Yes, yeah. This is a very challenging one because, so I want to start back at the idea of let's imagine you get a Yamaha receiver, a Denon receiver, and an Onkyo receiver, but you don't use the room correction on any of them. You just do a basic manual setup where you measured with a tape measure for setting the distances, and you used a handheld SPL meter for setting the trim levels, and that's all you did across those three different receivers. Because I'm inferring this from the way Paul worded his email, but because he mentioned something about, like for double the price, I expected it to sound better, and that's a completely reasonable expectation, but it's a bit misleading because in the scenario I've outlined, you buy these three different brands of receivers, you don't use the room correction in any of them and just do a basic setup. Regardless of the price, I would not expect to hear any difference.
Right.
And I think most people do. And I think reasonably expect to, because all in our consumer lives, we expect you buy this thing, you get this result. You pay more for what should be a better version of that thing, and you should get a better result. Unintuitively, AV receivers just aren't that way. I know. There are a ton of people on YouTube and online who purport that is the case. There are reviewers who talk about it as though it is that way. We're just saying we've done enough blind listening where we don't know what's playing, that taking away the room correction that you'd have in any of these things, there's no difference to be heard other than maybe the absolute extremes of, sure, maybe one of them has a slightly lower noise floor than the other, or if you turn it up to the absolute maximum loudness, one of them really can get a bit louder. But outside of those two absolute goalpost extremes, everything in the middle sounds the same. So if I went and bought the flagship receiver from some other brand, if I'm not running the room correction, with my experience, I'm not expecting to hear any difference. Doesn't matter how much I paid for it. So that's sort of the starting point. Then we get into, I don't know whether he used YPOW. He's got a receiver old enough that it doesn't have YPOW with reflected sound control. It was the old parametric only one measurement position version of YPOW. And if you used that and you only measured one spot, which I assume would have been your primary seat, we used to not recommend YPOW because that version of it, when it was just parametric filters, one measurement position, and it didn't EQ the bass because it didn't go below 63 hertz. Remember those days, Tom? when that was the version of YPOW that was going on, it delivered pretty bad results. Like, I'm not even going to mince words about it. It was just something that I wouldn't recommend using. It was akin to Onkyo's Accu EQ, which what I would just say the results you get are bad and don't use it. So what you're hearing, what you might have gotten used to, if you've had this receiver for 10 years and that's what you've been using for 10 years and maybe you ran YPOW, like, we don't know what you were hearing. we really don't know what that might have been. And if that's what you were used to, and then you use a system like Dirac, which look, Dirac is not foolproof. That if we level any criticism at it, it's that you can get excellent results with it, but it's not foolproof.
Right.
Where you position the microphone is very important. How you position the microphone.
And I've got an article about that. So
yeah,
we'll link that up in the show notes.
What you do in the settings to Dirac is important, and it is very possible to mess it up. It's very possible to get excellent results. It's very possible to also mess it up. So because of that, we don't know what your Dirac results have been. You've run it multiple times, I assume, following the on-screen instructions, but we don't actually know what your results are. So it's not as though we can say, oh, he ran YPOW or he ran Dirac, so we know exactly what experience he's getting.
Right.
We don't know. So what Tom said when I kind of cut him off, and you might not have heard what he said, it is what you need to do, which is to play a sweep through one speaker at a time. We don't want to play through multiple speakers, but play a sweep through one speaker or just the subwoofer by itself. That sweep needs to be nice and loud. On an SPL meter, we'd want that sweep to measure somewhere between 75 and 85 decibels. That's just because we're going to be relying on your human hearing, which is not linear, and it needs to be loud for your hearing to be somewhat reliable. But we want a nice, loud sweep played through there, because if I don't know, I'm assuming he took the Yamaha out and put the Integra in. I'm assuming he doesn't still have the YPOW set up and in there, so it would be difficult to do an A/B comparison. But what we're assuming is that if you were to play that sweep through the Yamaha setup, maybe it had some tipped-up treble and some tipped-up bass, which will reveal itself quite easily just playing a sweep. Because that sweep is saying play this entire sweep at the same volume. That's what the instructions say to do. And if there's a big old, rise or a big hump or a big dip somewhere, it's pretty easy to just hear that. And we would expect in quotes, that if Dirac were run properly, you wouldn't have that. It would be closer to an even sounding sweep than what you probably had with your YPOW results. If we were to just guess at which one would I trust more, not implicitly trust, but which one would I trust a bit more, it would be Dirac today versus the old version of YPOW, for sure. Right? That's where we would be. So if putting all that together, if that's the case, you play the sweep with your current Dirac setup, and you're like, okay, maybe it's not literally the exact same volume throughout the entire sweep, but it's kind of pretty close. If that's what you hear, then you just have to. Now it's dealing with the mental side of it. Now it's you,
right?
Where you just have to say, okay, I've heard the sweep, and now I've confirmed the instructions of that sweep were play this whole sweep at the same volume. That's more or less what I heard. Now I'm reasonably sure it's my perception of it that's a bit out of whack.
One thing I want to say, and I know that he's a new listener, or maybe he doesn't listen at all. He's just going to listen to this and just go back to whatever he doesn't know. But one thing that we have said many times before when we talk about dual subwoofers, and when you first get dual subwoofers and you get a more even bass response across your entire couch, the first thing that you will think is, all my bass is gone. I have lost all my bass, because there were humps.
It's a very common thing.
There were bass boosts and humps going on that you remember as being part of the movie.
Sure.
Okay,
we would absolutely expect with the old version of YPOW you had that you had some very uneven bass, because, like I said, that old version of YPOW, it didn't even EQ the subwoofer. Right.
So by getting rid of those, suddenly you're like, I remember there being something here, and it's not here anymore. Therefore, I am losing bass. It is only when you get to where that bass is actually supposed to be, because that was unnatural bass. That was bass that was not originally in the system. It is augmented by your room, and therefore you have heard it over and over again. You think it's normal. Okay, and then I liken this to people who eat at Applebee's, and they go to Applebee's and they're like, oh my God, this is the best food ever. And then they come to my house and eat, and they're like, how is this so much better than Applebee's? I'm like, because Applebee's sucks. The fact that it's the only place that you go does not make it good. It just means that's what you recognize. Okay, this is better because it has flavor. Applebee's does not. And I will, for those of you who love Applebee's, I am sorry. I will never stop saying this. You can stop listening to the podcast now because this will be a theme. I will never stop bagging on Applebee's. I hate them. So, this is the thing. Once you spend some time with it, you'll recognize the bass that's not supposed to be there isn't there anymore, but the bass that's supposed to be there is there, and even more convincing than it was. And the same thing on the treble side and the mid-range and everything else. There were boosts going on and suck-outs going on that you just thought was the way the music sounded or the movie sounded. They will be more even in theory. Now, we haven't really talked about your room. We haven't talked about the fact that it's very reflective, and that there's
because
nothing,
The other part of why it's important to play that sweep is it is entirely possible that with your Dirac setup, you play the sweep and you're like, oh, there are some very obvious uneven things going on in that sweep. At that point, we want you to come back to us, and we're going to get some more details about your room and how you ran Dirac and all that, because, I mean, that's going beyond the scope of the time we have for today and the scope of the question that was asked. But, I want that to be a possibility in your mind, that because, like I say, just running Dirac, it's like, well, there's a lot of variables in the running of it that could result in non-optimal results. It's not that it's like foolproof that you got great results.
And Dirac also is very much like we talk about room correction being the cherry on top of the sundae that is home theater.
It's not magic.
If you have an open gaping wound and you stick a 25-cent Band-Aid over the top of it, that is not enough. And that is what Dirac is to a very bad room. I don't know that your room is very bad. It doesn't sound very good, but I don't know what it is because you haven't given us enough information. So, no room correction. No, I don't care. Arkham, I know. All right.
Well, it's a bad name because it isn't room correction.
Right.
It's not what it is.
Yeah. So it's
an automated equalization.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
There is no system that you could buy. Like if you had infinite money, there is still no system. Even the JBL synthesis system, you cannot just fix the sound as it comes out of the speaker and make the room better. It doesn't work that way. I mean, you would literally have. There is no way to do that, not with just speakers. You need to change the room. So there's a lot going on here, but what we're setting you up with here, I hope, is a basic understanding of what you should be able to expect from room correction, how you may be able to detect what the room correction is doing for you, which is audiocheck.net, download a sweep, start playing some sweeps through at no more than 2 speakers, but as Rob says, 1 speaker at a time is the way to go, and just listen and see what it sounds like with Dirac on versus Dirac off. And if you only care about your one seat, that's fine, just do it there. But if you care about more than one seat in your theater, then you need to move from seat to seat and see how much different it sounds from seat to seat, because that too will affect everything.
Yeah, the big takeaway from this is listen to some sweeps. We know that's not sexy.
No, it's not.
It's not putting on demo material and I'm blown away by the stomping dinosaur. But like when we're trying to determine, is there something going really wrong in my frequency response, either because Dirac is on or off? You can't really do that unless the signal you're playing is just the uniform, hey, play all these sounds at exactly the same volume, and a sweep is by far the fastest and easiest way to ascertain that. So that's our big takeaway.
All right.
Alrighty. So Dale is on the list, as we mentioned. You had multiple questions, which they're not super long to answer, but it was just a lot to go through. So I had a couple other people who wrote in questions on Monday that I threw on the list just in case, but we didn't have time. So that was Dan and Christian, and I know there was one other person who came in on a Monday or Tuesday as well. So questions lined up for next week.
All right, we want to thank our listeners for the week. We want to thank Aras, Bill, and Raph for going to avrant.com, clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and sending us a PayPal donation, as well as our 141 patrons over at patreon.com, including Dale.
Yes, indeed. Aras, Bill, Raph, thank you so much for the PayPal donations. And Dale, thank you for being one of our 141 patrons. That's patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you would like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation.
So I want to thank George for talking us up to GIC, Dale for talking us up to SVS, and Dale again for sending me photos to use on AV Gadgets.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, George and Dale, for supporting the podcast in those ways. What was it? Audi Mute that Dale suggested checking out for alternatives for, eco-friendly absorption panels.
Yeah. Got some notes for thanking us for keeping the podcast going, even though I'm currently ravaged by Rona. From George, Dan, Dale, Jay, Aras, Dan, again, different Dan, and Eddie. So thank you very much to all of you for thanking us.
I'll have to look back over if those were two different Dans, but I think they were if I put them in there. But so George, Dan, Dale, Jay, Aris, Dan 2, and Eddie, thank you very much for sending in those notes of gratitude and encouragement. We certainly appreciate them. We appreciate everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
If you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. So should we do a thing?
I'm still recording. I didn't stop it yet if you want to.
Well, we need something. I mean, we need a new word? We're not going to do the same one, right? Because that doesn't seem fair.
Oh, definitely. I wasn't thinking of anything. I thought you had something in mind.
I don't have anything in mind. I never have anything in mind. My mind is always blank. I come here an open book with no pages filled, ready to be filled by an author of greater skill than me. I'm not really sure I'd have to parse that sentence.
That's a weird one.
Yeah.
I is correct, but it never sounds normal.
Yeah. Greater skill than I have. Yeah, I.
Yep.
I guess you'll just have to... I don't know. What do you got, Rob? Come on, man.
All the thought came to my mind was your dog's name. We could just say that.
Which one? I got two of them.
How about both? Hey, then they're really having to listen.
Oh, well. Felix and Violet?
There you go.
There we go. Felix and Violet. Mention them and you'll be... I don't know. What do they get for that? Just...
I mean, they don't get it. We know
that
you
they
listen to
to
the end of this stupid thing.
Well, you made it. You made it past 2 hours, people.
This one is definitely a plus 2 hours. The previous two episodes were just shy of 2 hours, so we couldn't proclaim them to be part of the 2 hour plus
That's right.
club. This one you definitely
give yourself a round of applause. Pour yourself a whiskey. Go kiss your wife. Spank your kids. Whatever it is that you do that gives you joy.
Jeez. We're definitely at the end of this thing. It might be the end of everything.
Who knows? This podcast may never see the light of day. Could be.
Could be.
See you next week. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.